Hi everyone, welcome back to Harshi Learn. In the last video, we saw how memory is divided into stack and heap. Now, let's take it one step further. In today's video, we'll understand how data is actually stored in .NET memory and we'll break down value types and reference type in simple way. Okay, this is one of those concepts that looks small but makes a big difference in how your code behaves. So let's get started. So, why does this actually matter for your code? Whenever you create variables in .NET, something important is happening in the background. It's not just about storing data, it's about how the data is stored and handled. Because you might have noticed this while coding, sometimes you change one variable and only that variable is affected. But other times, changing one variable also changes another. So, what's really causing this difference? The answer lies in how the data is stored in memory. That means, depending on the storage type, data can either be completely separate or shared between variables. And this directly affects how your program behaves and even how efficiently it runs. So, once you understand this concept, your code becomes much easier to predict and debug. Now, let's understand how data is stored in .NET. Okay, there are only two ways this happens. Either the variable stores the actual value or it stores a reference to that value. In value storage, the variable directly contains the data itself. So, whatever value you assign is stored inside that variable. In reference storage, the variable doesn't store the actual value. Instead, it stores a reference. Okay, which means it points to where the data is stored inside the memory. Okay, so the real data is stored somewhere else and the variable just refers to it. And this difference decides how your data behaves in your code. Now, let's understand value storage with a simple example. Okay, let's say you have int a is equal to 10 and int b is equal to a. Now, at this point, you might think both are connected, but they are not. Okay, what actually happens is .NET creates a separate copy of the value. So now a has its own value and b has its own value, even though both started with 10. Okay, now, if you change B to 20, it doesn't affect A. Okay. So finally, A is still 10 and B becomes 20. So what's happening here? Each variable is storing its own data independently. Okay. There is no link between them. So if you change one variable and the other remains the same. So in simple terms, value types always create independent copies. Now let's look at reference storage. Imagine this, you create a person object and you store it in a variable called p1. Okay, then you assign p1 to another variable p2. Now, here is where it gets interesting. At this point, it may look like we created a copy, but that's not what happens. Both p1 and p2 are pointing to the same object in memory. Now, if you change the name using p2, let's say you set it to Alice. Okay, and that change is also visible through p1. So both P1 and P2 will show the same value. Why does this happen? Because instead of storing the actual data, both variables are storing the same reference. They're pointing to the same place in memory. Okay. So in simple terms, reference type don't create copies. Okay. They share the same data. And that's why change in one place affects the other. Now, let's connect this with what we learned earlier in stack and heap because this is where everything comes together. First, think about value types. Okay, the actual value is stored directly in the stack, and that's why it is fast and it gets removed automatically when the method ends. Now, coming to reference type, it works little differently. The variable itself is stored in the stack, but it doesn't hold the actual data. Instead, it holds a reference. That means basically the address of where the object is stored. Okay, so where is the actual object that is stored in the heap? Because heap is designed to store objects and it manages them dynamically. And when those objects are no longer needed, the garbage collector cleans them up. Okay. So if I simplify it, Stack stores the values and references, and heap stores the actual data, and they both work together to manage memory efficiently. Now, just to connect this with garbage collection, since objects are stored in the heap, .NET needs a way to manage that memory. So, the garbage collector takes care of removing the objects that are no longer being used. Okay, for value types, you don't have to worry about this. They are automatically removed when the method ends. So overall, memory management is handled by .NET itself, which makes things much simpler for us. Alright, let's quickly summarize everything. When it comes to value types, each variable has its own separate value. So, if you change one variable, it doesn't affect the other. But with reference types, variable can share the same data. So, if you change the value using one variable, the other variable will also see that change. Okay. And one important thing to remember here is values are stored in the stack and objects are stored in the heap. So, if I say it simply, value types means separate data and reference types means shared data. Okay. And once you understand this, it becomes much more easier to understand how your data behaves in your program. So yeah, that's how value types and reference type work in .NET. Once you understand this, you'll start noticing it in your code everywhere. It becomes much easier to understand why data behaves in certain way. If you found this helpful, please do like the video, share it and subscribe to my channel. Your support really motivates me to make more videos like this. Okay, thank you so much. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, keep learning and have a great day.